There's a moment you've experienced more times than you've admitted. A younger woman looks at you. Not long, not exaggerated, just long enough. And then she smiles. You feel it land, and just as quickly you explain it away. She's just being polite. She smiles at everyone. It doesn't mean anything. Men who stay silent about moments like this do so for one reason. They don't trust their perception anymore. And that doubt didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of being told quietly, repeatedly, that attraction has an expiration date, that interest belongs to the young, that if a younger woman notices you, it must be accidental, harmless, meaningless. So you trained yourself to look away from the signal before it had a chance to register. But here's the uncomfortable truth most men never hear explained properly. That smile wasn't accidental, and it wasn't random. It wasn't loud because it didn't need to be. Men who notice patterns instead of reacting emotionally understand something others don't. Human behavior rarely announces itself. It reveals itself softly, then waits to see who's paying attention. And the men who miss this moment aren't weak. They were operating without the full picture. Let's slow this down. When a younger woman smiles at you, your instinct is to downplay it because you assume attraction requires effort, performance, impressing, selling yourself. That's how younger men operate. Older men don't realize that what they stop doing is exactly what's being noticed. You're not scanning the room for approval. You're not trying to be seen. You're not adjusting yourself every few seconds to fit someone else's expectations. You're just there. And that's where the tension begins because confidence, real confidence, isn't something you announce. It's something people feel when you're not trying to manage their reaction to you. You stand differently. You move differently. You don't rush your presence. And when a younger woman smiles at you in a coffee shop, a lobby, a line, or a passing moment, it's often because her nervous system has already made a decision before her thoughts caught up. She didn't decide to smile, she responded. This is where most explanations get shallow. They'll tell you confidence is attractive and move on. That's not what's happening here. What she's responding to is containment. Men who have lived long enough to stop chasing external validation carry a quiet psychological weight, not heaviness, density, a sense that nothing needs to be proven in this moment. And that quality stands out sharply in a world full of noise. Younger men are often still auditioning for their own identity. They're loud, reactive, overexpressive, constantly checking how they're being received. You're not, and that difference creates contrast. That smile is her noticing the contrast without consciously naming it. But here's where it gets more interesting. Because that smile isn't only about admiration, it's also about safety. Not the dramatic kind, the subtle kind. Emotional safety, predictability, groundedness. Men who don't explain themselves, men who aren't trying to steer the interaction, men who don't need to win the moment. Those men register as stable. And stability triggers something deeper than attraction. It triggers ease. She doesn't feel pulled into a performance. She doesn't feel evaluated. She doesn't feel like she has to keep up. She can just exist for a second. That's rare. And the smile becomes the body's way of acknowledging it. Now here's the part most men get wrong, and this misunderstanding alone has kept countless moments from ever becoming anything more. You assume the smile is either interest or politeness. That's a false binary. Sometimes the smile is a question not asked with words, but with attention. Who are you? Are you as calm as you seem? Do you know what you're carrying? This is where the internal test happens, often without her realizing it. If you flinch, if you look away too fast, if you dismiss the moment with discomfort, the signal closes. Not because you failed, but because the loop stayed open. Men who react chase, men who notice allow. And allowing is where quiet power lives. But we haven't reached the core reason yet, because the real reason younger women smile at older men isn't admiration, it's recognition. And once you see what's being recognized, you stop second-guessing entirely. You don't lean forward, you don't retreat, you don't perform, you simply remain. And that's when everything about these interactions begins to change. Recognition is a quiet thing. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't explain itself, and it never asks for permission. When a younger woman smiles at you, what she's often recognizing isn't your age, your status, or even your appearance. She's recognizing resolution. Men who have lived long enough to stop negotiating with themselves carry something unmistakable. A settled internal posture. Decisions already made, values already chosen, emotional debts already paid. You're no longer auditioning for life. And that changes how people experience you. Here's where the internal tension deepens, because most older men don't realize this shift has already happened inside them. You still remember the years when attention felt conditional. when you had to earn interest, when being noticed required effort, humor, charm, or proof. So when attention arrives now, unprompted, unforced, you mistrust it. You think, that can't be for me. But that doubt doesn't come from humility. It comes from outdated self-perception. Men who never updated their internal identity keep responding to the world as if they're still asking for entry, when in reality, the door has already opened. That smile is often a subtle acknowledgement of authority, not dominance, not control, the kind that comes from someone who doesn't need to explain why they're standing where they are. Younger women are surrounded by emotional volatility, reactivity, overexposure, men narrating their intentions before they've even lived them. Then you appear contained, unhurried, not signaling availability or avoidance. And that difference creates a pause. That pause is where the smile lives. But there's another layer most explanations never touch. A younger woman doesn't smile at an older man only because he's confident. She smiles because he's unpressured. There's no hunger in your eyes, no agenda in your posture, no urgency behind the interaction. You're not trying to extract anything from the moment, and psychologically, that's disarming. People who don't need something from you allow you to relax around them. They don't tighten the room, they don't shift the emotional temperature, they hold space. That's what she feels, and this is where many men unknowingly collapse the dynamic. They rush to define it. Was that interest? Should I act? Should I ignore it? But the moment was never asking for action. It was asking for presence. Men who notice patterns instead of chasing outcomes understand this instinctively. They don't move to close the loop immediately. They let it breathe. Because here's the psychological truth most people don't want to confront. Attraction often forms after safety, not before it. And safety isn't built through words. It's built through consistency of self. Now let's talk about experience. Not the brag-worthy kind, but the internal kind. Younger men often live in anticipation. Older men live in recall. You've seen how things play out. You've watched patterns repeat. You've learned where effort is wasted and where it matters. That perspective softens your movements. It removes desperation from your decisions. And when a younger woman smiles at you, part of her curiosity isn't romantic, it's existential. How did he arrive here? What does he know that I don't yet? What does it feel like to be settled inside yourself? She's not thinking those words consciously, but her nervous system is listening. This is where the smile becomes a probe, not a flirtation, not a promise, a probe. If you respond with equal calm, no spike, no collapse, you pass without trying. If you overcorrect, joke too much, or retreat emotionally, the probe closes. Not because you were judged, but because the signal didn't match the substance. Men who remain grounded don't try to turn moments into meaning. They let meaning reveal itself. And this brings us to an uncomfortable realization many men resist. Some younger women smile simply because they are allowed to around you. No competition, no performance, no emotional demand, just a brief recognition between two people occupying the same space, one of whom isn't trying to shape the other's response. That freedom is intoxicating, and it's why the smile often lingers just long enough to be felt, but not explained. But we still haven't reached the deepest reason. Because beneath confidence, stability, and experience lies something far more potent, something most older men don't realize they carry until it's reflected back at them. And once you understand this final layer, you stop questioning these moments entirely. You stop wondering what it meant because you finally understand what you mean. There's a reason these moments stay with you longer than they should. Not because the smile was dramatic, but because it wasn't. Men who have learned to live without constant feedback often underestimate how rare that has become. You carry silence comfortably. And silence, real silence, does something to people. It removes distraction. It removes noise. It removes the ability to hide behind performance. When a younger woman smiles at you, part of what she's responding to is the absence of chaos around you. You're not broadcasting insecurity. You're not narrating your value. You're not asking to be understood. You're already resolved. And resolution creates gravity. Here's the psychological shift most men never make, even when they feel it happening. That smile isn't inviting you to step forward. It's observing whether you need to. Men who stay silent when they could speak, and speak only when necessary, trigger a subtle recalibration in others. People start orienting themselves around you instead of pulling you into their frame. That's not dominance, that's orientation. And orientation is deeply attractive. But there's another layer here, one that's darker, quieter, and far more revealing. Some younger women smile because they sense boundaries. Not rigid ones, not defensive ones, clean ones. You don't blur yourself to be liked. You don't lean in emotionally before trust exists. You don't confuse attention with entitlement. Younger men often mistake access for connection. They rush intimacy. They overshare. They attempt to shortcut depth. You don't. And that restraint signals something most people don't consciously articulate, but instinctively respect. You are not available to everyone. And paradoxically, that makes you safer to approach. Because safety isn't about openness, it's about predictability. She can feel where you begin and where you end. That clarity creates ease, and ease creates curiosity. Now pause here, because this is where many men internally sabotage themselves. You tell yourself, I'm reading too much into this. It's probably nothing. I shouldn't assume. That voice isn't humility, it's self-erasure. Men who learned to doubt their own perception did so because earlier versions of them were punished for noticing, for wanting, for interpreting signals that didn't lead anywhere. So now you default to dismissal. But here's the recalibration that changes everything. You don't need to assign meaning to the smile. You need to understand why it happened. And why it happened has far more to do with who you are than what she intended. That realization removes urgency. It also removes confusion. Because once you understand that your presence itself is the stimulus, you stop hunting for confirmation. You stop scanning for permission. You stop shrinking the moment to protect yourself from disappointment. Men who notice patterns instead of chasing validation understand something subtle. Not every signal is an invitation. Some are acknowledgments, and acknowledgments don't require a response. They require recognition. This is why the most composed reaction is often the simplest one. A returned smile, unrushed eye contact, no escalation, no withdrawal, just mutual awareness. That's it. And here's the twist that reframes everything you've been taught. The men who experience this most consistently are not the ones trying to attract. They're the ones who stopped asking who's watching. Younger women smile because they sense self-possession, not arrogance, not indifference. Self-possession. The kind that comes from someone who knows where they stand even when no one is looking. And that quality doesn't announce itself, it's felt. This is why these interactions often happen in passing, in elevators, in waiting rooms, in moments with no context. There's no social script to hide behind, only presence. And presence tells the truth. But we still haven't addressed the final, most misunderstood reason. The one that makes older men uncomfortable to consider because it forces a reevaluation of everything they were told about desirability, age, and relevance. Because sometimes the smile is exactly what it looks like. Not curiosity, not testing, not politeness, attraction. Not loud, not demanding, but real. And once you understand why that's possible without fantasy, without ego, you stop questioning your place in the world entirely. You move differently, and people feel it before you ever speak. Here's the part most men avoid looking at directly, because it contradicts what they were conditioned to believe. Sometimes the smile isn't symbolic. It isn't abstract. It isn't psychological curiosity dressed up as politeness. Sometimes a younger woman smiles at you because she finds you attractive. Not hypothetically, not for your age, not as a compliment wrapped in distance. Attractive, period. And the discomfort you feel when you hear that says more about old narratives than current reality. Men who internalize the idea that desirability peaks early often carry a quiet confusion later in life. They feel something has shifted, but they don't trust it. So they rationalize it away. They tell themselves attraction must follow youth, energy, novelty, visibility. But attraction doesn't follow timelines. It follows signal clarity. An age when integrated rather than resisted sharpens signals. Younger men often wear their desire openly. It leaks through their posture, their speech, their timing. They want to be chosen, so their behavior bends toward outcome. You don't. And that difference changes the entire dynamic. You're not asking to be evaluated. You're not auditioning. You're not trying to convert attention into validation. You're simply present. That alone shifts the power balance. But here's the deeper psychological truth most people never articulate. Attraction isn't about wanting to be seen. It's about wanting to feel oriented. And older men who have resolved their internal identity offer orientation without effort. You know who you are. Even if you don't announce it, you know what you tolerate and what you don't. You're not searching for meaning in the interaction. You already have it. That's why the smile feels different. It's not chasing. It's not testing. It's recognition of coherence. Now let's address the detail most men underestimate. Physical markers of age, gray hair, slower movements, stillness, often amplify psychological presence rather than diminish it. Why? Because stillness communicates certainty. People who are unsure move more, speak more, signal more. You don't. And that restraint creates contrast against a culture addicted to exposure. That's why the smile often carries a subtle pause afterward, a moment of recalibration. He didn't lean in, he didn't look away, he didn't take anything from the moment. That steadiness registers as emotional strength, not dominance, not intimidation. Strength and strength without demand is rare. Now here's where many men misunderstand attraction and lose internal alignment. They think attraction requires escalation. It doesn't. Sometimes the most accurate response is non-action because the smile already completed the exchange. She saw you. You saw her. Nothing needed to be claimed. Men who understand this don't rush meaning. They let moments exist without trying to own them. That's why they continue to be noticed, because they don't chase intensity. They carry depth, and depth doesn't announce itself. It waits. Now let's confront the final identity shift, the one that changes how you move through the world from this point forward. Once you understand why these smiles happen, you stop asking, "What should I do?" That question disappears. You stop scanning for permission. You stop second-guessing your interpretation. You stop shrinking moments to avoid disappointment. Not because you've become arrogant, but because clarity removed confusion. You realize you were never invisible. You were simply quiet. And quiet men are often misunderstood until someone notices the stillness behind it. That's what the smile acknowledges. Not fantasy, not hope, not nostalgia, presence. And once you recognize that presence in yourself, you no longer need these moments to validate you. They become confirmations, not questions. You don't move faster. You don't move louder. You move cleaner. Men who understand this don't explain themselves. They don't correct the room. They let the room adjust. And once that shift happens internally, the world responds differently, without effort, without force, without performance. Because when you stop wondering why you're noticed, you become undeniable.